As you work with more and more layers, one of the things that happens is that your layers panel might get a bit out of control. So, in order to organize your layers, you can use layer groups. Not only do layer groups help organize, you can also move all of the layers in a group at one time. You can scale or transform them. You can change opacity and blend modes, and you can even mask all of the layers and create special effects by adding layer effects to groups. So in the layers panel, I have the four small images selected. And in order to create a group, I can either use the layer menu and choose to group layers, or use the keyboard shortcut Command G on Mac, Control G on Windows, or we can just drag them down to the folder icon to create a group. Now, by default, the group is collapsed, but we can click on this little icon right here in order to expand it. I'm going to go ahead and just make my layers panel a little bit larger so we have a little bit more room to work with. And then I'm going to double click on group and I'm going to rename this small photos. Now, I know that it might seem a bit overkill and it might take a little bit more time to make sure that all of your layers are named. But if you're working in a collaborative environment and you're going to hand off your files to another artist or a production team, or even if it's just you that has to revisit the files later to make changes, it's really to your advantage to keep track of and name your layers. All right, with the Move tool selected, I just want to make sure that we have the Auto Select Layer disabled. Although I will point out you can also set this to auto select groups. Then with the small photos group targeted, we can use the move tool to move all of the layers within that group at one time. We can also use the arrow keys in order to nudge the contents of all of the layers of the group. And if we hold down the shift key and use those arrow keys, we'll move them in larger increments. All right, now it's time to add a logo to the image. Now, before we open the logo file, if I were to drag and drop another layer or even a group into this file, Photoshop would actually put it within the small photos group because the group is open and targeted. If I want to avoid that, I can just close the group. And now, if I were to drag and drop a layer, Photoshop will place it on top of the small photos. It won't nest it within. It's not that big of a deal if it does nest it because you can always rearrange it, right? I can add layers to a group. So let's make the grapes visible. I could go ahead and drag and drop that within the group, or I could drag it above. I just have to watch for that single cyan highlight. Now it's out of the group. Or I could drag it below the group, again, watching for the single cyan line and then releasing the cursor. So you can always change the stacking order. It's just that sometimes it's helpful to know things like closing a group will force Photoshop to drag and drop something on top of the group instead of putting it within the group. So returning to Bridge, let's grab the logo. I'll double click to open it up. We can see there's two layers in here. There's a text layer and an ellipse. It's actually not a text layer. They're both shape layers just because I wasn't sure what fonts we would all have installed. Now I'm going to put these in a group, so I'll just hold down the Command key to select both of the layers and use Command G on Mac or Control G on Windows to add it to the group. All right, let's rename this to logo. And then I'm going to use that Command Shift T in order to use Window, Arrange, and then Tile so we can see both of our documents. Then from the logo document, I'll drag the logo layer group into the harvest image. I'm going to hold down the Shift key on Mac in order to set it right there in the center. And then we no longer need the logo file open. So let's close that without saving. So with the logo targeted, I can go ahead and move both of those layers at one time. I could also transform the layers by choosing Edit and then Free Transform. If I hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on Windows, that will transform from the center. And I'll just make it about that size and then tap the check mark in order to apply that. Now, if I want to change the opacity of a single layer, I can select that layer. And then I can hover my cursor over the word opacity and drag left or right in order to increase or decrease the opacity. I can also click within the text entry area and just type in a number for the opacity, or I can use the little arrow right here and use the slider to change opacity. My favorite way though is if you have the move tool selected, Then all you need to do is tap the key on your keyboard. So if I want this to be 70%, I'll tap the 7 key. If I want it to be 65%, I'll tap quickly 6 and 5. If I want it to be 100%, I'll tap 0. And if I wanted it to be 0%, then I have to tap 00 quickly. The same shortcuts all work if I want to change the opacity of all of the layers within a layer group. I just need to select the group and then tap, say, 8 to change the opacity to 80%. Now, if I decide that I want to change all 4 of the small photos into circles to better match with the logo, I can reveal the contents of the small photo group, select one of the layers, and then return to the frame tool. I'll want to select the circle icon, and then I'm going to click in the upper left corner of that layer and then drag out to the lower right. And although it looks like I'm dragging out a square, when I release the cursor, it will be a circle. So I'll move to the peppers, and you can drag from any corner that you want. I'll just drag and drop that. And then instead of having to go all the way back to my layers panel, I'll just right click and choose the strawberries, and then click and drag out. And again, right click with the pumpkins and click and drag. Excellent. I think that looks better. So at this point, I will do another file and then save as. I'll go ahead and append it with O2, saving it in the layers folder as a multi-layered document, clicking save, and then returning to Bridge so that we can see the new harvest o2.psd file.